Welcome back. As I was teaching one of my children this morning how to do a very simple checkmate pattern, it occurred to me that other beginners could benefit from this as well. This was one of the first checkmate patterns that I learned as a youngster when I learned how to play chess. Someone taught this to me. I've heard it called the ladder checkmate or the staircase or stair-step mate, and it can be done with 2 queens or a queen and a rook or 2 rooks with slight differences for each one because the pieces are slightly different in what they can do. In the situation shown on the board, we have 2 queens, and black doesn't have anything. The situations get more complicated if there are other pieces on the board, pawns, knights, other things. But very simple. The idea is that the queens will move past each other like so, as if you were moving hand over hand on a ladder or foot past foot on a staircase. They can also go the other way. And in this case, because where the black king is, this would be an easy way to start. And you already know how the queens are going to move. And they're going to force the king down. Because this queen here already cuts off this entire rank from the king. When you move this one here, it's check. And now you have both rows or ranks being cut off entirely. And the king is forced to move to the next rank. It can't move to this square because this queen guards that square as well. So the king moves. You move the other queen past it. It doesn't matter where the king goes. If it comes closer to the queens or moves further, it doesn't matter because the queens protect each other. That's one difference between queen versus queen and rook or rook and rook. And again, move the queen past the other one. Doesn't matter where the king goes. Now the king has to go here. So as it moves, you bring the queens past each other. And again, each queen cuts off an entire rank. And so the king has to move to the final rank. And now it's checkmate. And if your queens start out in a different position, rather than the one I just showed you, for example, here they're not lined up ready to do the stair step or ladder mate. However, it's a very simple matter to just move them into the position that you want. They do not have to be on the edge of the board, but you can just line them up next to each other, diagonally as so. And again, it doesn't matter which legal square the other player makes. You can just move them past each other. And notice here that the king is not actually in check yet, but we are cutting off these ranks. And of course, the diagonal because of the way that queens move. So it doesn't matter where the king goes. We move it over one more time. Whenever the king moves, we move over. When the king moves, we move over, and it's checkmate. We can do this on the side of the board, the back of the board, the front of the board, or the other side. And again, it doesn't matter where the queens start out, as long as we move them into this position. It might not be the fastest checkmate available, depending on where the queens are at any given time or where the king is, but it's one of the easiest. Just line them up on ranks or files that are next to each other, slightly off so that they're diagonal, like hands going over the rungs of a ladder. And as I said, it cannot just be 2 queens. It could be a queen and a rook or 2 rooks. In this case, we have a rook. One difference is that the rook, unlike a position where the front piece is a queen, the rook cannot protect the other one. But the queen in the back, as we've shown here, protects the rook in front of it. So our first move is check. If the king moves forward, it doesn't matter. We just as we did with the queens, we move past one another. The difference is the king can get a little closer in these positions because the rook doesn't attack diagonal squares, but it is protected, again, by the queen behind it. So if that were a rook behind it, the king could now capture the front rook, but it can't because this is a queen and it's guarding it. So the king has to move past, and we repeat the same exact pattern we saw with the 2 queens. It doesn't matter where the king goes. It's checkmate because the pieces cut off entire files and force the king toward one side or the other of the board. And again, it doesn't matter where the pieces start out. We just move them into this position. So, for example, here I've just placed the rook and the queen in random places on the board, and we can move them into the position, and so we can prepare the ladder mate. If you don't know any other way to mate, that's why these are the basic, the simplest. We can just move the rook over, preparing to move the queen here. So now, no matter where the king goes, and it can't go here or here because the queen cuts off this diagonal, but let's say it goes here. We can put the queen behind the rook, remember, on the opposite side of the rook from the king. because the queen needs to protect the rook from behind. So again, no matter where the king goes, now we can walk across with the queen protecting the rook from behind, the rook cutting off this entire file, and the queen cutting off this entire file. So the king has to move over. And we just walk it across. Doesn't matter which of their legal squares that they move to, they have to move. They can't come this way because we've cut off this file. And then that's checkmate. Again, on the side of the board, back, front, side, doesn't matter. With two rooks, however, it's different. I have actually played opponents that forgot that it's slightly different with two rooks. The rooks cannot move diagonally, so they cannot protect one another in this situation. So if we start off with the same move that we did with the two queens, the king is obliged to move closer to the rooks, as close as possible, with the same idea that we're cutting off rank after rank as we move the king down the board. But now, in this situation, the king is going to come right here and is directly attacking this rook. If we want to continue our staircase mate, we have to make a change. Now, if we move one of these rooks in order to just protect the other one, then we're no longer in a position to do the staircase mate. But what we do is we move it to the complete opposite side of the board, like so. And now if the king decides to move this way to prevent this check, let's say it does that, we move the other rook to the other side of the board, but again keeping them in a diagonal position from one another so that they can move past each other. So now wherever the king goes, and it can't go that way because these two rooks cut off these files. So it moves here. Now we stair step past each other just as we did before. And again, the king may move closer, but it won't make it there in time, because when this check happens, yes, the king's going to get here to challenge that rook, but again, we can go all the way across the board. Not all the way, because then it won't be able to move down. But here. Now the king can go left or right, but that's all it can do. It doesn't matter. If it goes here, in order to keep this rook from checking in the corner, then we bring the rook across so it can stair step down. If, however, it went here, we can immediately checkmate in the corner. So black might choose to delay it by one move by coming here to prevent this checkmate, but now we can move the rook back, and again, they're still in the stair step position, and because our king is here, we didn't go all the way to the edge of the board. So now, no matter where black's king moves, we have checkmate on the edge of the board. And as you saw, the only difference between the two rooks versus the queen and rook, or queen and queen, is that they cannot protect each other. Neither of them can protect each other, so when the king gets close, just move to the complete opposite side of the board. And as we saw with queen and rook, or queen and queen, if they're not in a position to automatically start the staircase mate, it's not that difficult to just move them into position. For example, here, and now we're ready to begin our staircase maneuver across. That's it. And let's go back up one. There are plenty of ways to do this. You just don't want to move this because the king is guarding that square and nothing is protecting it from our side. And you can move them into whichever position you want. This was just the easiest one that I spotted here to bring the rook so we could begin our staircase maneuver on this side. But we could have gone somewhere else. We could have decided we wanted to place this rook over here by this maneuver and then staircase down this way. But that's more complicated. So we look for the simplest way. But again, if you're in time trouble, you don't have time to look for the simplest way. Make a move, but try to get them on files that are next to each other and ranks that are next to each other. So they're diagonal from each other by one square. If the king moves towards you, now you can do this, and we can begin our staircase maneuver. Once again, if the king starts getting closer in order to attack one of the rooks, well, we're not going to check here on our next move as we had intended because the king can capture the rook on that square. So again, we want to take one of these rooks to the complete opposite side of the board. So now it doesn't matter what the opponent's king does. We can bring our rook over here and stair step on this side. Or you can stair step from opposite sides. For example, this way. So now when the king moves, we can stair step here. And then if it comes closer, we can transfer to the other end of the board. Now there's no way the king can get down here in time. It's fruitless, and the king has to move to the edge, and it's checkmate. So I hope that helps any beginners who are working on basic checkmates. There are 3 ways to do the ladder mate, or the staircase mate, as it may be called in different places. There's the queen and the queen, There's the queen and the rook, and there's the rook and the rook, with slight differences between them. The rook and the rook is the weakest because the king can't attack the front piece if it moves into the wrong spot, so you sometimes will have to pause your checking and switch to the opposite end or opposite side of the board. With two queens, it's the easiest because they protect each other no matter what order they're in. If you have one of each, try to make sure that the rook is in front so the queen's protecting it from behind. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.